Today I'm making a traditional British Cornish pasty. Cornish pasties have been part of the British diet since like the 13th century, when the upper class, the upper crust, the royalty, they would eat them, these big pieces of pastry filled with venison and beef and game and seafood. And it wasn't until the 18th century that they became really popular with the lower class. And I mean the lower class, literally, with the miners down in Cornwall. The Cornish pasty was the perfect meal to take right down into the tin mines. They just didn't have time to come up for lunch. They were so far down there. And the meal was a meal in itself because you got the pastry case, which protected the filling, but at the same time, one end of it could be the beef and the other end could be something like jam in there. The traditional pasty dough on the outside, the pastry, has to be firm enough for it to be dropped into a pocket and to be strong enough so that it doesn't fall apart and all the filling fall out. So when we make the paste, we actually use bread flour. And bread flour's got more gluten in there, so that makes it much tougher. So I start off with my flour, and into that I'm going to add some salt and some lard and some butter. And then I just rub those all in together till I've got nice fine crumbs. Once I've got the crumbs, then I'll add some water, and the water just brings it all together into a nice dough. Don't worry too much about being tough on the dough because there's a lot of gluten in there, and as this all comes together, we're actually stretching that gluten and it's making a really nice dough then. Once we've got a dough, then we need to let it rest for about an hour or so. And while that's resting, we can make the filling. The ingredients for a traditional Cornish pasty are skirt steak, potatoes. The potatoes need to be waxy potatoes. So here in the USA, if you're making them, then use something like Yukon Gold, not russets. They'll just crumble and fall apart. Then salt and pepper, yellow onion, and rutabaga, or for my family and friends across the pond in the UK, swede. These are all chopped up into little bite-sized pieces, tossed together with the salt and pepper, and then put into the filling in the center. No gravy, no cooking, just those ingredients all together. Back in the 18th century, people were going down the mines, and you know, money was scarce, and so was meat. People couldn't get the meat, and when they could, it was really expensive. So the potatoes and the turnips, swedes, rutabagas, onion, they were all cheap, so they made up most of the Cornish pasty. I've been using my same knives now for over 30 years, and I decided it's time to get new ones. When you get good quality knives, they last 30 years or more. It's not true that you just, buy a cheap knife and then it lasts a while. It doesn't, they don't work. You've got to get some decent knives. When I was shopping for knives, I came across these ones, Mercer knives, and I love them, I really do. They're not incredibly expensive, but these are absolutely gorgeous. They're wonderful in the hold. When you use a knife in the kitchen, it really needs to feel like it's sort of an attachment to the end of your hand. It's not going to be sort of really heavy. It's got to feel comfortable. And I mean, just look at the Santoku knife. High carbon, no stain, German steel, absolutely gorgeous knives. And what I like about these, well, apart from this handy dandy board that you just take the knives, you chop. I mean, this is pretty cool in the kitchen, right? But what I like about these knives is if you can't afford to go and buy a full set, you can just buy one at a time and just start adding to your collection. If you look after them, if you sharpen them, they'll last a lifetime. They'll last 30 years more. So if you're just starting out in a new home, you're going off to culinary school, or you're looking at replacing your knives, then I put a link to the Mercer knives in the description below. So we're going to start first of all by taking the skin off the rutabaga. And if you look up close, you can see it has this core around the edge. You've got to remove that. skirt steak is perfect for this dish, and we just cut it into those bite-sized pieces again. If you can't get skirt steak, you can use top sirloin, but again, cut it into little bite-sized pieces. Then the salt and pepper. It needs a lot of seasoning, so plenty of salt and even more pepper. Mix all of those ingredients together. Over 120 million Cornish pasties are made and sold every year in the UK. There's no wonder it's one of the UK's favourite snacks. Now to roll out the pastry and then the filling and in the oven. How easy are Cornish pasties to make. The dough's been resting now for just over an hour and we can start rolling this out. A little flour on the table, and the recipe makes about 6 good plate size Cornish pasties. So we roll it to about 1/4 of an inch thick, and then we can cut out our circles. And the easiest way to do this is to take a plate and invert it onto the pastry, and then just simply cut around it. Gather up the surplus pastry, and then we can roll that out again to make the other 3. Now we can take the filling and put it into the center of each one. And make sure there's a nice mixture of meat and onion and rutabaga. Then a little egg wash around the side, halfway, and then we can fold them. And then finally, we have to crimp the edges to stop all the meat and all the vegetables falling out. And a little egg wash on each one. This will give them a really nice glaze when they come out of the oven. Into the oven, 350 degrees, for about 35 to 45 minutes. When the pasties come out of the oven, we let them cool down a little so that they can rest and all the juices and everything else can just all relax and they don't just all rush out when we cut it. Then we can take our pasties. See, are these just the perfect for taking down the mines? Look all the way along the edge there, the crimping. The crimping came in really useful down the mines, down the tin mines, because when the miners were mining for the tin, in the ore there was also arsenic. Of course, that's poisonous, and so their dirty hands, they could actually hold the pasty like this on the crust and then just eat the pasty. So it was easy. And then what happened was they would take the crust, and then the miners were really superstitious. It was a dangerous place to be. There was something called the knockers. The knockers were little gremlins, little mischievous people, spirits that could cause all sorts of trouble. So not to offend them, to keep them happy, they would take some of the crusts and then just throw it. Oh, sorry. Throwing the crust to the knockers meant they protected you and wouldn't cause any trouble. Winston the knocker. Sorry, Winston. There's no meat in there either. Beautiful, crispy, crunchy pastry on the outside and delicious, tender meat and vegetables in the center. No wonder the recipe's been around for 100 years and more. We've reached 75,000 subscribers on the channel. If you've not subbed yet, then click on the sub below. Leave a comment, and because we've reached 75,000, the next video will be a Q&A, a tough one, and we're going to be addressing some of the meanest too. So if you've got a question, leave the question below. Hopefully I can answer it for you, and we'll see you again soon.